I'm Amanda, 32, and I still can't erase the image of my father Richard standing in the doorway of my grandmother Eleanor's $1.6 million Victorian home, his face cold as he pushed her out into the raging thunderstorm. Her nightgown was already soaked, her pleading eyes meeting mine as I pulled up to witness this horror. Just 3 weeks later, she was gone. None of us were prepared for what happened at the will reading, least of all my father. The silence that fell over the room when Eleanor's lawyer revealed her final wishes was deafening. Before I dive into this heartbreaking story, where are you watching from today? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever witnessed family betrayal or want to protect your loved ones from similar situations. The warning signs I missed might help save someone you care about. Grandma Eleanor wasn't just my grandmother. She was my confidant, my teacher, and my biggest supporter. Our Sunday visits were sacred, a tradition we'd maintained since I was old enough to stir batter for her famous apple pie. The secret is in the patience, she'd say, both about baking and life. When I graduated college, she was there beaming in the front row. When my marriage fell apart 3 years ago, her cozy kitchen became my sanctuary as I pieced myself back together over cups of tea and her gentle wisdom. Family is the most precious thing we have, Amanda, she would tell me. It's not about the blood, but about who stands by you when the storms come. I never imagined my own father would be the one to push her out into a literal storm. Dad's relationship with Grandma Eleanor had always been strained. My mother used to say they were too similar, both stubborn and proud, but I knew there was more beneath the surface. There was a coldness in how my father spoke about his mother, a detachment that became more pronounced after my grandfather Thomas passed away 5 years ago, leaving Eleanor a widow. I started noticing changes about 8 months ago. Dad suddenly became interested in Grandma's finances, offering to help organize her affairs and visiting her Victorian home more frequently. The beautiful house had been in our family for 45 years, a treasure trove of memories with its wraparound porch where we'd spend summer evenings, the grand staircase I used to slide down as a child, and the garden where Grandma taught me the names of every flower. Your father asked about my will again, Grandma mentioned during one of our Sunday baking sessions, her hands working the dough with practiced precision despite her 78 years. He seems very concerned about the house. Says property taxes are getting too high for me to manage alone. The house had become increasingly valuable as our neighborhood transformed from middle class to sought after. Real estate developers had been circling, offering cash deals that Grandma always politely declined. This house isn't just wood and stone, she'd say. It's where your grandfather and I built our lives. Where your father grew up. Where you learned to bake. Some things are worth more than money. Dad began planting seeds of doubt about Grandma's mental capacity. Mom forgot her doctor's appointment again. He'd mentioned casually at family dinners. She couldn't remember where she put her checkbook when I visited. Little comments that built a narrative of a declining elderly woman, despite the sharp, witty grandmother I saw every week who still completed the New York Times crossword in pen. She really shouldn't be living alone in that big house, Dad would say, his voice filled with manufactured concern. All that space going to waste when she only uses 3 rooms. My Aunt Judith and Uncle Philip began nodding along, accepting Dad's assessment without question. I tried to counter these narratives. She seems perfectly fine to me, I'd argue, but was met with patronizing smiles. You only see her for a few hours on Sundays when she's at her best, Dad would reply. I'm there dealing with the reality. Grandma confided her worries to me in private. Your father keeps moving my things and then asking if I remember where I put them, she whispered one day, her voice trembling slightly. Am I losing my mind, Amanda? No, Grandma, I assured her, a chill running down my spine. You're as sharp as ever. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, not just in the family, but in Eleanor herself. I noticed she became more hesitant, second-guessing her words and decisions. The isolation was beginning as family members called less, believing Dad's stories about her, getting confused by too much stimulation. I should have seen what was coming. I should have done more. The first earthquake in our family came on a warm evening in May. Dad had invited everyone over to Grandma's house for dinner, unusual since he typically avoided family gatherings. The Victorian dining room was set beautifully, with Grandma's heirloom china and crystal glasses, the ones she only used for special occasions. After dessert, Dad clinked his glass and stood up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have an announcement," he said. "Mom and I have been discussing her future, and we've made some decisions to ensure her comfort and security." Grandma looked confused, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Eleanor has generously decided to transfer the house to me," Dad continued smoothly. "At her age, the burden of maintaining this property is simply too much. This way, she can enjoy her golden years without worry while staying in her home." The room fell silent. I looked at Grandma, whose expression had shifted from confusion to distress. "Richard, that's not what you said," she interjected, her voice uncharacteristically small. "You told me it was a tax document to help me save money on property taxes." Dad's smile tightened. "Mom, we discussed this at length, remember? The lawyer explained everything before you signed." He pulled out a folder and removed several notarized documents with Grandma's shaky signature at the bottom. "It's all legal and proper. The house is now in my name, but nothing changes for you." My Aunt Judith nodded approvingly. "That makes sense. It's for the best, Mom." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Grandma, is this what you wanted?" I asked directly. Before she could answer, Dad interrupted. "Amanda, this isn't your concern. This is between Mom and me." After dinner, I found Grandma in the kitchen, hands trembling as she washed dishes she normally would have left until morning. "I never meant to sign away my house," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "He brought over a notary and so many papers. He said it was to avoid probate and save on taxes." I trusted him. I was helping her dry the crystal glasses when Dad appeared in the doorway, his face darkening as he realized what we were discussing. "So, you're turning her against me now?" he snapped. "No one's turning anyone against you," I replied. "But Grandma says she didn't understand what she was signing." What followed was the most vicious argument I'd ever witnessed between them. Dad's voice grew louder, his facade of caring son dropping completely. "You're becoming senile," he shouted at his mother. "This is exactly why I needed to take control. You can't manage your own affairs anymore." Grandma drew herself up to her full height, dignity intact despite her tears. "This is my home, Richard. You tricked me." Dad's face contorted with anger. "Your home? The home you always loved more than me? The home you and Dad never thought I was good enough for." Old resentments bubbled to the surface, decades of bitterness spilling out. Then came the threat that made my blood run cold. "Challenge this, and I'll have you declared incompetent so fast your head will spin. You'll spend your remaining years in the cheapest nursing home Medicaid will cover." I tried to intervene, but Dad turned his fury on me. "Stay out of this unless you want to be cut off too." I'd never seen this side of my father before. Calculating, cruel, and completely unrecognizable. 3 days later came the moment I'll never forget. I was driving to Grandma's house during the worst thunderstorm we'd had in years. I'd been calling her all day with no answer, a sense of dread growing with each unanswered ring. As I pulled into the driveway, headlights illuminating the rain-soaked Victorian facade, I saw them on the porch. Dad was physically pushing Grandma out the door, her nightgown already drenched, a small overnight bag clutched in her hands. "You can't do this." I heard her cry as I ran from my car, rain immediately soaking through my clothes. "Please, just let me take my photo albums." "My jewelry. Richard, those were your grandmother's pearls. The house and everything in it is mine now," Dad replied coldly, blocking the doorway. "You should be grateful I don't press charges for the silver you tried to take." I reached the porch steps, slipping on the wet wood. "Dad, stop this. What are you doing?" He barely glanced at me. "Taking care of a situation that should have been handled years ago. She's your problem now." With that, he went inside and locked the door, leaving his 78-year-old mother standing in the pouring rain, homeless. I helped Grandma to my car, her body shaking with cold and shock. "I just wanted my photographs," she kept saying. The ones of Thomas. Of you as a baby. They're not worth anything to anyone but me. That night, I brought Grandma to my small one-bedroom apartment. I gave her my bed and took the couch, lying awake listening to her muffled sobs through the thin wall, feeling utterly helpless. The next morning, Dad's campaign began in earnest. Calls and texts to family members painted a picture of an elderly woman having a mental breakdown, making wild accusations, becoming a danger to herself. Amanda's always been soft-hearted, he told them. Mom manipulated her with tears and confusion. The doctors agree she needs professional supervision. There were no doctors, no evaluations. Just Dad's words against ours. And somehow, his version was the one most of the family believed. The first week after the eviction, Grandma seemed to physically shrink. Her tall, dignified posture gave way to a hunched, uncertain shuffle. The sparkle in her blue eyes dimmed. She spent hours staring out my apartment window at nothing in particular, barely touching the meals I prepared. "I'm sorry to be such a burden," she'd say whenever I assured her she could stay as long as needed. My apartment wasn't designed for two people, especially with one being an elderly woman accustomed to space and privacy. We managed by developing careful routines, bathroom schedules, designated spaces for our few belongings, quiet periods when I worked from home. I took 2 weeks of emergency family leave from my job at Memorial Hospital to help Grandma stabilize. My supervisor, Sandra, was understanding but concerned. "Family matters can take longer than you think to resolve," she warned. "Don't exhaust your resources too quickly." Wise advice I couldn't afford to follow. Grandma needed me now. I tried everything to lift her spirits, bringing home her favorite desserts, finding old movies she loved on streaming services, even printing photos from my phone of family gatherings to replace the albums locked away in her house. Nothing seemed to penetrate the fog of grief and shock. 63 years of memories, she murmured one evening. Every birthday card you ever made me. The flag from Thomas's military funeral. My mother's recipes. All locked away like they meant nothing. While Grandma rested, I researched elder law attorneys, finally making an appointment with Patricia Goldstein, whose office was a 30-minute drive away. We met in a cluttered office with diplomas covering one wall and file boxes stacked along another. "What you're describing is elder abuse," Patricia said bluntly after hearing our story. "Specifically, financial exploitation and psychological abuse. Unfortunately, it's more common than you'd think, especially within families. So we can fight this?" I asked, hope rising. "Get her house back?" Patricia's expression was guarded. "Possibly, but these cases are challenging. The deed transfer appears legally executed, with a notary present. We'd need to prove coercion or lack of capacity at the time of signing." But there was coercion. He lied about what she was signing. Which becomes a he said, she said situation. Patricia explained patiently. Judges tend to look at documented evidence. Medical evaluations, witness statements, patterns of behavior. Do we have any of that? We didn't. Just our word against Dad's. "And I have to be frank about costs," Patricia continued. "A case like this could run $20,000 or more, with no guarantee of success." I left the meeting with a heavy heart and a folder of information about elder abuse that felt simultaneously overwhelming and inadequate. Meanwhile, Dad wasted no time making the house his own. Through mutual family friends, we heard he was renovating extensively, tearing out Grandma's beloved rose-patterned wallpaper, replacing the antique fixtures, and clearing out clutter, which meant family heirlooms and treasures. "He's having an estate sale next weekend," my cousin Sophia texted me. "Grandma's furniture, china, everything." I drove past the house the day before the sale to see Grandma's possessions spread across the lawn like discarded memories. The grandfather clock that had chimed through 5 generations of our family, the hand-carved rocking chair where she'd nursed my father, the oil paintings done by my great-grandmother. When I confronted Dad, standing among strangers pawing through our family history, his response was cold. "My house, my things. If Eleanor wanted any of this, she shouldn't have tried to turn the family against me." The family itself was fracturing along fault lines of loyalty. Dad had convinced many that Grandma's confusion and my emotional overreaction were the real problems. I received fewer invitations to family gatherings. Conversations went quiet when I entered the room. "Your father says you've always been jealous of his relationship with Eleanor," my Aunt Judith told me during an uncomfortable phone call. "That you're trying to control her assets yourself." The isolation was strategic and effective. With each passing day, our support system dwindled. But then came our first small victory. While helping Grandma sort through the few possessions she'd managed to grab before the eviction, I found a small leather-bound journal tucked into her overnight bag. Inside, in her meticulous handwriting, were dated entries documenting Dad's behavior over the previous 6 months. October 15th, Richard asked to see my bank statements again. When I questioned why, he became agitated. Later noticed my checkbook moved from desk to kitchen counter. November 3rd, $500 missing from my wallet. Richard suggested I might have paid a bill and forgotten. December 20th. Richard brought friend Charles over, asked me strange questions about what year it was, who the president is. Later overheard them discussing cognitive decline. The journal was a gold mine of contemporaneous notes, evidence of a calculated campaign to undermine Grandma's confidence and manipulate her finances. Even more shocking was the entry from the day before the document signing. Richard came with Notary Susan. Many papers. When I tried to read them, Richard said we were in a hurry. Notary had another appointment. Said papers were for reducing estate taxes and avoiding probate complications. Never mentioned transferring house. "Grandma, why didn't you tell me you were keeping this journal?" I asked. She looked embarrassed. I thought I might be imagining things. That maybe Richard was right, and I was becoming confused. I didn't want to worry you if the problem was just my failing mind. With renewed determination, I contacted Patricia again. The journal wasn't definitive proof, but it was a start. And when I reached out to slowly, a clearer picture emerged of Dad's methodical manipulation. He hadn't just targeted Grandma, he'd been constructing an entire false narrative throughout the family. For the first time since that terrible night in the rain, I felt a flicker of hope that the truth might eventually come to light. By the 3rd week of Grandma living with me, we'd established a rhythm that almost felt normal. She was regaining some of her spark, even offering to teach me the correct way to iron shirts when she caught me hastily smoothing one with my hair straightener before work. Encouraged by her improvement, I organized a small family gathering at my cousin Sophia's larger home. The stated purpose was to discuss family concerns about Eleanor's well-being. Neutral language I hoped would draw in even those who had sided with Dad. Sophia prepared finger sandwiches and tea, setting up her comfortable living room with enough seating for the 7 family members who had agreed to come. Grandma dressed carefully in one of her few remaining outfits, a navy blue dress that had fortunately been in her overnight bag. "I'm nervous, Amanda," she confessed as we drove to Sophia's. "What if they don't believe me?" "Just tell your truth," I assured her, squeezing her hand. The journal entries, the timeline of events, it speaks for itself. We were arranging chairs when the doorbell rang. Sophia answered it, and her sharp intake of breath made me look up. There in the doorway stood Dad, uninvited and unexpected, with a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. "I heard there was concern about my mother's care," Dad announced smoothly, walking in as if he owned the space. As her son, I thought I should be present. "This is Gerald Hoffman, our family attorney." Our family attorney. I'd never seen this man before in my life. The dynamic of the meeting shifted instantly. Family members who had seemed open to hearing Grandma's side now sat stiffly, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Dad took control of the conversation before it even began. "Before we get started, I think it's important everyone sees this." He nodded to Gerald, who withdrew a document from his briefcase and began distributing copies. "This is a professional medical evaluation of my mother conducted last week." I snatched a copy, scanning it in disbelief. It described Eleanor Mitchell as suffering from moderate to severe cognitive impairment with paranoid ideation and confabulation of events. The doctor's signature at the bottom belonged to someone named Dr. Andrew Phillips, a name I'd never heard before. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Grandma hasn't seen any doctor named Phillips. This is fabricated." Dad's expression remained calm, reasonable, the caring son concerned about his mother's decline. "Amanda, I know this is difficult to accept. Mom was evaluated at Lakeside Medical Center last Tuesday. You weren't informed because, frankly, your enabling of her delusions has become part of the problem." I turned to Grandma, who looked as shocked as I felt. "Grandma, did you see this doctor?" She shook her head.
No.
"I've been with you every day. I never went to any Lakeside Medical Center." Dad sighed dramatically. "See what I mean? She doesn't even remember the evaluation. This is exactly why I've been forced to take more drastic steps." He nodded again to Gerald, who produced another document. "I've filed for guardianship of my mother. The hearing is next week." The room erupted in confused conversations. Guardianship? This would give Dad complete control over every aspect of Grandma's life, her finances, her medical care, where she lived, even who she could see. "This is elder abuse," I shouted over the noise. "He's manipulating all of you. Grandma has been living with me for weeks. She never saw this doctor." Dad's voice cut through the chaos, deadly calm. "Amanda, we know about the journal. We know you've been coaching Mom to write false entries. We have the text messages." My blood ran cold. "What text messages?" Gerald produced printouts of text exchanges between me and Sophia, discussing the journal and our plans for this meeting. Private conversations, somehow intercepted. "How did you get these?" Sophia demanded, her face pale. Dad ignored her, addressing the room. "My mother needs professional care, not manipulation by my daughter who, sadly, has her own emotional issues following her divorce. The guardianship hearing will settle this matter legally." That's when it happened. In the middle of Dad's speech, Grandma, who had been sitting quietly in growing distress, suddenly clutched her chest. Her face contorted in pain as she slumped sideways in her chair. "Grandma!" I rushed to her side as she struggled to speak, her words slurring. "Someone call 911. The next hours were a blur of ambulance sirens, emergency room lights, and tense hospital corridors. The diagnosis: a stress-induced stroke, moderate in severity. Grandma was admitted to the intensive care unit, unconscious and vulnerable. And there, in the sterile hospital hallway, came the next battle. Dad attempted to take control of her medical decisions, presenting himself to hospital staff as her designated healthcare proxy. "I have papers giving me authority," he insisted to the charge nurse. "So do I countered, producing the healthcare directive Grandma had signed years ago, naming me as her representative. I'd kept it in my important documents folder. Thank goodness. This is more recent and has never been revoked. The hospital's risk management team was called to sort through the conflicting claims. After reviewing both documents, they determined mine had the later date and appeared valid. Dad was furious, but temporarily outmaneuvered. While Grandma remained unconscious, I used the hospital's computer to research Dr. Andrew Phillips, the supposed evaluator. He existed, but worked primarily at a private practice specializing in documentation for insurance claims. A doctor willing to diagnose without thorough examination? The pieces were fitting together. More disturbing was what Sophia discovered about Dad's financial situation. Using her access as a bank employee, she discreetly looked into public records. "Amanda, Uncle Richard is drowning in debt," she told me in a whispered conversation in the hospital cafeteria. "There are multiple collection judgments against him, and his business is on the verge of bankruptcy." But here's the really shocking part. He took out a mortgage on Grandma's house the day after she signed it over. A big one. $900,000. What? What would he need that much cash for? Sophia looked around nervously before sliding her phone across the table, showing a series of online gambling transactions. "He's got a serious problem. These are just the ones I could find easily." My father's desperation suddenly made terrible sense. This wasn't just about resentment or control. He was financially ruined and saw Grandma's house as his bailout. Further investigation revealed an even more troubling connection. The notary who had witnessed the house transfer, Susan Blackwell, was the sister of Gerald Hoffman, Dad's family attorney. A quick social media search showed them together at multiple charity events with Dad over the past year. This hadn't been an impulsive act of cruelty. My father had methodically planned to take everything from his mother, assembling a team of enablers to help him do it legally. As this revelation sank in, I felt the family alliances shifting again. My Aunt Judith, who had steadfastly supported Dad, came to the hospital after seeing Grandma's condition. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted, her normally confident voice wavering. "Richard told us Eleanor was exaggerating for attention. But seeing her like this..." She trailed off, looking at her mother's small form in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and 4 lines. Uncle Philip, Dad's golf buddy for 20 years, stopped taking his calls. 2 cousins reached out to offer help with hospital visits. Slowly, a small coalition was forming, not enough to completely turn the tide, but enough to make me feel less alone in the fight. Dad, sensing the shift, escalated his attacks. He filed a complaint with the hospital questioning my emotional stability and demanding Grandma be transferred to a facility where he had arranged appropriate care. Hospital security had to be called when he tried to enter her room against visitor restrictions. The battle lines were drawn more clearly than ever, and Grandma, still unable to speak for herself, lay caught in the middle. The hospital room became my second home. I arranged to work remotely 3 days a week, spending every possible moment by Grandma's side as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The stroke had affected her speech and right-side mobility, but her neurologist was cautiously optimistic about recovery with therapy. "Talk to her," the nurses encouraged. "She can probably hear you even when she seems unresponsive." So I talked. I read her favorite poems, described the changing season outside her window, and reminded her of happy memories from childhood. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with clear, lucid eyes that told me she understood everything happening around her. On the 6th day, she spoke her first words since the stroke. "Amanda," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "My strong girl." I burst into tears, holding her frail hand carefully between mine. "I'm trying to be, Grandma. I'm fighting for you." Over the next few days, she began communicating more, though speaking clearly remained difficult. She would squeeze my hand once for yes, twice for no. The physical therapist taught me exercises to help her regain strength, and we worked on them diligently together. During one of these sessions, when we were alone, she beckoned me closer. "Need to tell you," she struggled with the words. "Important. Don't strain yourself, Grandma. We have time." She shook her head firmly. "No time. Listen." With visible effort, she continued. "Michael Brennan. My real attorney. Call him." "Michael Brennan?" I repeated. "Not Gerald Hoffman?" Her expression darkened at Hoffman's name. "Never my lawyer. Michael, 40 years. Has instructions." Before I could ask more questions, her nurse entered to administer medication, and Grandma closed her eyes, the effort of communication having exhausted her. That night, I searched for Michael Brennan, finding a small elder law practice across town. I left a message, explaining who I was and that Eleanor Mitchell had asked me to contact him. The next morning, Grandma's condition suddenly deteriorated. Her breathing became labored, her oxygen levels dropping despite supplemental oxygen. Tests revealed a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in her lungs, a known complication of stroke and immobility. The ICU team worked frantically to stabilize her, but the prognosis turned grim. The attending physician took me aside, his face solemn. "We're doing everything we can, but your grandmother's condition is critical. I suggest you contact any family members who would want to say goodbye, just in case." The next 24 hours passed in a haze of medical interventions, hushed conversations with doctors, and revolving visits from family members. Dad appeared briefly, performing the role of grieving son perfectly for the hospital staff before telling me in a harsh whisper, "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't stressed her with your accusations." By the following evening, the medical team had done all they could. Grandma's systems were failing. I sat beside her, holding her hand as the monitors beeped softly in the background. Her eyes fluttered open. "Amanda," she whispered, her voice barely audible.
Promise.
"Anything, Grandma. Truth will come out. Stay strong. Love you." These were Eleanor Mitchell's last words. She passed peacefully at 3:17 a.m. with me by her side, my tears falling onto our clasped hands. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight crushing my chest. I'd failed her. Failed to protect her from Dad's machinations, failed to restore her home before she died, failed to give her the peaceful final years she deserved. Dad took control of the funeral arrangements immediately, brushing aside my suggestions with dismissive efficiency. "As her son, this is my responsibility," he declared. "I know what Mom would have wanted." He didn't. The funeral he arranged was everything Grandma would have hated: formal, impersonal, with an expensive closed casket she would have found wasteful. The minister barely knew her, speaking in generalities about a life well lived, without any of the specific stories that made Eleanor who she was. I sat in the front row, numb with grief and anger, watching family members who had believed Dad's lies wiping away tears that felt too little, too late. Dad himself delivered a eulogy praising my beloved mother's generosity and wisdom, the same mother he had thrown out into a storm just weeks earlier. When it was my turn to speak, I abandoned the polite remembrance I'd prepared and instead read a passage from Grandma's favorite book, one that spoke of courage in the face of injustice. Dad's face darkened as he recognized the pointed message beneath the words. After the service, he pulled me aside, his public mask of grief momentarily slipping. "I'm putting the house on the market tomorrow. Don't think this changes anything." I felt something break inside me then, the last thread of hope that somewhere deep down, my father had some redeeming quality I hadn't seen. There was nothing there but greed and callousness. Returning to my apartment alone that night was almost unbearable. Grandma's few possessions still occupied corners of the space, her reading glasses on the side table, her cardigan hanging on the back of a chair, her slippers neatly placed by the couch. Each item a small monument to absence. I poured a glass of wine with shaking hands and was about to sink into despair when my phone rang. An unknown number. "Is this Amanda Mitchell?" a male voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's calling?" "Michael Brennan, Eleanor Mitchell's attorney. I just received your message. I'm so sorry to hear about Eleanor's passing. I've been out of the country and only returned yesterday. She was a remarkable woman and a friend of many years." I nearly dropped the phone. "She mentioned you in the hospital. Said you had instructions?" "Indeed I do," Michael replied, his tone shifting to one of professional determination. "Eleanor came to see me 3 days after she was forced from her home. She was very clear about what had happened and what she wanted to do about it. We have a great deal to discuss, Amanda. How soon can you come to my office?" For the first time since Grandma's death, I felt a tiny spark reignite. Maybe all wasn't lost after all. Michael Brennan's office was nothing like Patricia Goldstein's cluttered space. Located in a converted Victorian home not unlike Grandma's, it featured polished wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and framed photographs of Michael with various elderly clients, including one of him and Grandma at what appeared to be a garden party, both smiling widely. "Eleanor and I went back decades," Michael explained, noticing me studying the photo. "I handled her parents' estate, then her and Thomas's wills, and now—" He trailed off, shaking his head sadly. "I should have been more available when she needed me. The guilt weighs heavily." "You couldn't have known," I said, the words familiar from my own internal dialogues. "Perhaps not, but I'm determined to make it right now." He opened a folder bearing Grandma's name. "After Eleanor came to me, we worked quickly to document everything and put certain protections in place. She knew time might be short. Over the next 2 hours, Michael outlined the legal strategy Grandma had initiated. She had signed an affidavit detailing the circumstances of the house transfer, explaining the deception and pressure tactics. She had authorized a forensic financial investigation that uncovered the unauthorized mortgage and gambling losses. Most importantly, she had created a new will, one that directly addressed the fraudulent transfer and established her true final wishes. The key is proving undue influence and misrepresentation, Michael explained. With Eleanor's affidavit, the journal, and the evidence of your father's financial motives, we have a strong case. But there's one more element that may prove decisive. He pressed a button on his phone. Margaret, could you bring in the recordings? Recordings? My confusion must have shown on my face because Michael smiled slightly. Eleanor was cleverer than your father gave her credit for. After she realized what had happened with the house transfer, she began recording conversations on her cell phone. It's completely legal in this state for a person to record conversations they're a part of without informing the other parties. Margaret entered with a USB drive, which Michael inserted into his computer. And there was Grandma's voice, clear and steady, capturing damning interactions with Dad. Richard, you told me those papers were for tax purposes. What does it matter what I told you? You signed them. The house is mine now. Challenge it and you'll end up in a state facility so fast your head will spin. There were multiple recordings, each more incriminating than the last. In one, Dad explicitly admitted to taking money from her accounts without permission. In another, he discussed with Gerald Hoffman how to handle the old lady if she keeps making noise. I listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face, grief mixed with vindication. Grandma had been fighting back in her own quiet, methodical way all along. We're filing to invalidate the deed transfer on grounds of fraud and elder abuse, Michael continued. And there's the matter of the will reading, scheduled for tomorrow. Your father doesn't know about the new will yet. It might be wise to keep it that way until everyone is gathered. The next 24 hours were a blur of preparation. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, the journal, text messages, medical records proving Grandma had never seen Dr. Phillips. Michael prepared legal documents and arranged for a court reporter to be present at the will reading to create an official record of proceedings. I barely slept that night, rehearsing what I would say, how I would finally confront Dad with the truth in front of everyone. Part of me feared he would find some way to wriggle out of accountability, as he had so many times before. Another part feared my own emotions would overwhelm me at the crucial moment. The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Michael's office. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, and was surprised to see several unexpected attendees arriving, a representative from Grandma's bank, the head of the hospital's elder care department, and most shockingly, Susan Blackwell, the notary who had facilitated the fraudulent deed transfer. Michael greeted each with professional courtesy, showing them to seats in the conference room. Family members began arriving, Aunt Judith looking uncomfortable, Uncle Philip stone-faced, cousins and more distant relatives filtering in with expressions ranging from curiosity to dread. Dad arrived last, flanked by Gerald Hoffman. He looked confident, even smug, nodding curtly to me across the room before taking a seat near the head of the table. I noticed he had already brought property listings for Grandma's house, barely waiting until she was buried before planning to cash in. At precisely 2 p.m., Michael closed the conference room door and took his position at the head of the table. Thank you all for coming today. We're here for the reading of Eleanor Mitchell's last will and testament. Before we begin, I should clarify that I, Michael Brennan, have been Eleanor's attorney for over 40 years. Mr. Hoffman, he nodded toward Gerald, has never represented Eleanor in any capacity, despite any claims to the contrary. Dad shifted in his seat, the first crack in his confident demeanor. Furthermore, Michael continued, I must inform you that the will we are about to read was executed on May 18th of this year, 1 week before Eleanor's passing, and replaces all previous versions. Dad leaned over to whisper urgently to Gerald, who looked increasingly concerned. Before reading the will itself, Eleanor requested that a video statement be played for all present. Michael clicked a remote, lowering a screen on the wall, and there was Grandma, sitting in this very office, looking directly into the camera. Though visibly tired and strained, her eyes burned with determination. "If you're watching this, I've passed on," she began. "I want to set the record straight about recent events. My son Richard manipulated me into signing over my home through deception, claiming the documents were for tax purposes when they were actually a deed transfer. When I discovered the truth and confronted him, he threatened me and ultimately forced me from my home during a thunderstorm, with only the clothes on my back." The room was dead silent as Eleanor methodically outlined everything that had happened: the financial exploitation, the lies to family members, the fabricated medical evaluation, and the attempted guardianship. "I am of sound mind as I record this," she continued. "The notion that I suffer from cognitive impairment is a fiction created by my son to justify his actions. Dr. Lawrence Wilson, my physician of 20 years, has provided a written statement confirming my cognitive health, which is included with my will." As the video continued, Michael distributed copies of bank records showing unusual withdrawals from Eleanor's accounts, along with the fraudulent mortgage documentation on the house. The evidence mounted, item by damning item. When the video ended, I finally stood, my voice steadier than I expected. "Dad," I said, looking directly at him. "How could you do this to your own mother? To throw her out into a storm, to take everything she valued, to try to declare her incompetent. All for money." His face had gone pale, but anger quickly replaced shock. "This is ridiculous." Mother was confused. Amanda manipulated her into making these allegations. "This video won't hold up in court." "Actually," Michael interjected, "the video is admissible as a dying declaration and is supported by substantial corroborating evidence, including these." He played several of the audio recordings, filling the room with Dad's own voice making threats and admitting deception. One by one, family members who had supported Dad began to shift away, physically and emotionally. Aunt Judith was openly crying. Uncle Philip looked like he might be sick. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Susan Blackwell, the notary, stood up trembling. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "Richard Mitchell paid me $5,000 to notarize those documents without properly verifying Mrs. Mitchell's understanding or consent. He told me it was a family arrangement everyone had agreed to. I've already filed a statement with the ethics board surrendering my notary commission." Dad jumped to his feet. "You stupid woman. You signed an NDA. Which is void if it covers illegal activity," Michael noted calmly. Dad turned to Gerald, who was already gathering his papers. "Gerald, do something." The attorney shook his head slightly. "I think I should recuse myself from this matter, Richard. You'll be receiving my formal withdrawal letter tomorrow." He stood and left the room without another word. Dad looked around wildly, seeing former allies abandoning him one by one. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling before our eyes. "This is a conspiracy," he sputtered. "I'll fight this. I'll sue every one of you. That house is legally mine." "Perhaps we should continue with the actual reading," Michael suggested, seemingly unperturbed by the outburst. "It may address some of these concerns." What followed was the most satisfying 30 minutes of my life. Grandma's will systematically dismantle Dad's schemes while revealing the true depth of her wisdom and foresight. Eleanor's will was a masterpiece of justice and foresight. Michael read it with perfect professional calm, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes as each provision was revealed. "The transfer of my home at 1482 Maple Avenue is hereby contested as fraudulent," Michael read. "I have established a separate legal fund of $100,000 specifically to pursue legal remedies against this transfer, including civil and potential criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation." Dad's face grew increasingly ashen as Michael continued. "Furthermore, I have established an irrevocable trust that predates the fraudulent transfer by 2 weeks, into which I placed ownership of said property. This trust, the Eleanor Mitchell Family Heritage Trust, renders the subsequent transfer to Richard Mitchell null and void, as I no longer own the property individually at the time of that transfer." Michael paused, allowing this bombshell to sink in. Grandma had outmaneuvered Dad completely. The house had never actually been his, despite the deed transfer, because she had already placed it in a trust before he manipulated her into signing it over. The mortgage taken out by Richard Mitchell on said property is therefore fraudulent and subject to criminal prosecution, Michael continued. I have already filed complaints with the appropriate banking authorities and the district attorney's office. The remainder of the will detailed specific bequests, family heirlooms to various grandchildren, a scholarship fund for the local community college, donations to her church, and favorite charities. Dad was not disinherited entirely. Grandma wasn't vindictive, but his share was placed in a controlled trust with strict provisions against gambling or irresponsible spending. When Michael finished reading, the room remained silent for several long moments. Then Aunt Judith stood up, walked around the table, and embraced me. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you," she whispered. "Or Mom. I should have known better." One by one, family members approached to offer apologies, expressions of shock, and commitments to support the legal actions outlined in the will. Dad sat alone, abandoned by his attorney and allies, staring blankly at the property listings he'd brought, homes he would never profit from. When he finally looked up, the anger had drained from his face, leaving something hollow and almost pitiful. "She planned this," he said quietly. "She knew exactly what she was doing." "Yes," I agreed. "She was exactly as sharp and capable as I always said she was." The weeks that followed were intense but healing. The legal mechanisms Grandma had put in place worked precisely as intended. The fraudulent deed transfer was invalidated. The mortgage company, faced with evidence of fraud, began proceedings against Dad rather than attempting to enforce the loan. The district attorney opened an investigation into elder abuse and financial exploitation. Family relationships began the slow process of repair. Aunt Judith and Uncle Philip became my strongest supporters, helping to sort through Grandma's recovered possessions and participating in family councils to ensure nothing like this could happen to another vulnerable family member. "I should have seen the signs," Judith said during one such meeting. "Mom was always so independent, so sharp. I wanted to believe Richard because it was easier than questioning him. We all failed her in different ways," I acknowledged. "The important thing is that we learn from this and protect each other better in the future." As for me, the experience transformed my understanding of both justice and family. I had always worked in healthcare administration, but now I enrolled in evening classes on elder law and patient advocacy. The hospital where I worked supported this direction, eventually creating a new position for me as elder care patient advocate. Through this work, I connected with dozens of families facing similar situations, adult children struggling to protect elderly parents from exploitation, often by other family members. Grandma's story, which I shared with permission from the family, except Dad, became a powerful teaching tool about the warning signs of elder abuse and the legal protections available. The most difficult question I faced was what relationship, if any, to maintain with Dad. He avoided jail time by accepting a plea deal that included restitution, community service, and mandatory gambling addiction treatment. The family money he had hoped to access remained firmly out of his reach. At first, I couldn't bear to see or speak to him. The memory of Grandma standing in the rain haunted me too vividly. But eventually, 6 months after her death, I agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop. He looked older, diminished somehow. The confident manipulator replaced by a man forced to face consequences perhaps for the first time in his life. "I've been trying to understand why," I said after our awkward greeting. "Why you would do that to your own mother." Dad stared into his coffee cup for a long time. I started with small things, borrowing money from her accounts, telling myself I'd pay it back. Then the gambling got worse and I needed more. Each step made the next one easier. He looked up. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am sorry, Amanda. For everything." Was it genuine remorse or another manipulation? I couldn't tell, and perhaps it didn't matter. What mattered was that I no longer allowed his actions to consume my energy and attention. He had chosen his path. I was choosing mine. "I hope your treatment helps," I said finally. "But I need time. A lot of it." We left it there, not reconciled, but not completely severed. A door left slightly ajar for possible future healing, but only if earned through genuine change. Meanwhile, life rearranged itself around Grandma's absence. The house she loved so much found a new purpose, one that would have made her smile. On what would have been Grandma's 80th birthday, we gathered at 1482 Maple Avenue, not as a family in mourning, but as a community celebrating a legacy. The Victorian house had been transformed according to the detailed instructions in Eleanor's trust documents, which Michael had kept separate from the will until all legal challenges were resolved. The Eleanor Mitchell Center for Elder Dignity, read the elegant sign by the freshly painted front door. Inside, the grand old home had been thoughtfully modified, an elevator installed alongside the magnificent staircase, accessible bathrooms added, the garden redesigned with raised beds for those who couldn't bend easily. A community center specifically designed for seniors, Michael explained as he gave family members a tour. Offering legal clinics, social activities, educational programs, and advocacy services, all the things Eleanor valued throughout her life. The trust Eleanor established was comprehensive, funding both the center's operations and a legal aid program specifically for elder abuse victims. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The house Dad had schemed so desperately to control would now help protect others from similar exploitation. But the most powerful moment came when Michael gathered everyone in the library, the room where Grandma had spent countless hours reading to me as a child, and played one final video. Eleanor recorded this just 2 days before her stroke, he explained. She asked that it be shared only after all legal matters were settled. Grandma appeared on screen, seated in her favorite armchair, the one Dad had sold at the estate sale and we had managed to track down and repurchase. "My dear family," she began, her eyes clear and voice steady. "If you're watching this, the truth has finally come to light. I don't want this difficult chapter to define our family forever. There's something I never told any of you, something I think it's time you knew." She reached beside her and held up an old, leather-bound book. "This is Thomas's journal from when Richard was born. My husband was not an emotionally expressive man, as most of you know, but he wrote his deepest feelings here." Grandma opened the journal and began to read. "Our son was born today. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I felt such terror that I would fail this small person who depends on me completely. My own father was cold, critical, never satisfied with anything I achieved. I swear I will be different with Richard, but I don't know how. I never learned the language of fatherly love." She looked up from the pages. Thomas tried his best, but he didn't know how to show Richard the affection and approval he needed. It created a wound that never properly healed. This doesn't excuse what Richard did, but perhaps it helps explain the bitterness that grew in him over the years. The room was completely silent. Dad had never attended these gatherings, but Aunt Judith was quietly crying. "I tell you this not to engender sympathy for Richard, but to break a cycle," Grandma continued. Hurt people. Understanding this can help us heal and ensure these patterns don't continue to the next generation." She set down the journal and leaned toward the camera, her expression softening. "I forgive Richard, though I cannot condone his actions. And I leave you all with this. Our family is not defined by our worst moments or our greatest failures. We are defined by how we recover, how we learn, how we rebuild." As the video ended, I noticed something unexpected, a small box on the library table with my name on it. Michael nodded for me to open it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small, worn leather-bound book, Grandma's personal journal, dating back decades. The letter, in her familiar handwriting, read, "Amanda, my brave girl. Of all my grandchildren, you inherited not just my recipes, but my stubborn sense of justice. This journal contains not family secrets, but family wisdom, the lessons I've learned over a lifetime about love, forgiveness, and standing firm when it matters most. Let it guide you when I no longer can. The greatest inheritance I leave you isn't material wealth, but the courage to protect what's truly valuable. All my love, Grandma." Tucked into the journal's pages was a folded piece of paper, the original recipe for her famous apple pie, complete with the secret ingredients she never shared with anyone else. That afternoon, in the center's newly renovated kitchen, I taught the first cooking class for local seniors, making Grandma's apple pie while sharing her story. As the familiar cinnamon aroma filled the room, I could almost feel her standing beside me, nodding in approval. In the months that followed, the center became a vibrant community hub. More remarkably, it became a model for similar programs across the state. Two legislators who heard Eleanor's story began drafting enhanced elder protection laws, informally known as Eleanor's Law, strengthening penalties for elder abuse and creating better oversight of property transfers involving seniors. Families who had suffered similar situations found their way to the center, sharing their experiences and finding both practical help and emotional support. Each story validated Grandma's vision that her personal tragedy could become a catalyst for broader change. On the anniversary of her passing, I stood in her beloved garden, now flourishing with new plantings and accessible pathways, watching elderly visitors enjoying the space she had cultivated for decades. A small memorial plaque caught the afternoon sun. Eleanor Mitchell, she turned injustice into legacy. The house that had been at the center of such pain and conflict had transformed into something beautiful and healing. It was the perfect reflection of Grandma herself, resilient, purposeful, and ultimately triumphant. Dad never returned to the house, but I heard through family that he had completed his treatment program and was working a modest job in a town 30 miles away. Perhaps someday there would be reconciliation, but that chapter remained unwritten. What was certain was that Grandma had the last word, in the most magnificent way possible. She had transformed her greatest personal tragedy into a legacy that would protect countless others. In her final act of wisdom, she showed us all that true justice isn't just about punishment, but about creating lasting positive change from the ashes of wrongdoing. Standing there in her garden, I finally felt peace. "Well played, Grandma," I whispered to the wind. "Well played." What would you do if you were in Amanda's situation? Have you ever witnessed someone taking advantage of an elderly family member? What warning signs do you think are most important to watch for? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, or you think it could help someone else recognize elder abuse, please like, subscribe, and share. Together, we can protect our most vulnerable loved ones and ensure they're treated with the dignity they deserve. Thank you for listening, and remember, family legacy isn't measured in property or possessions, but in how we care for each other.